Today, we're going to find out if you're claustrophobic. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please ask the like button to deepen the defensive trench around OP Rock, and tell them in exchange they can take home any of the artifacts they pull out of the ground. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. 33-year-old Nicola Raybon was a nurse who also studied criminology in college. In January of 2012, she was thrilled to move into a new house in Lancashire with her partner John and her 2 kids. And then later that month, she and her family flew out to the Caribbean island of Antigua to attend her father's second marriage. And while she was excited for her father, she was mostly just excited about the pampering she was going to get from the 5-star hotel she was staying in. On the first night they arrived, Nicola went down to the bar to have a couple drinks with her friends. Now, Nicola was not known for being a big drinker or partier. In fact, she was more well known for her work with different charities and for being a really dedicated mother. In fact, one time, after her children were named mascots for a local soccer team, Nicola apparently lost sleep. She was so excited for them. After Nicola had a few drinks, her friends said they were going to leave and go to a restaurant to grab some dinner, and they asked her if she wanted to come. And Nicola declined, and she said, "You know what, I'd rather just go watch the sunset up on the beach. You guys have a good time." After her friends left, Nicola walked up the steps onto the beach. She took her sandals off and took her phone out of her pocket, and she put them on a chair, and she walked off. Later that night, Nicola's father was supposed to meet up with his daughter, but when he went to their meeting spot, she didn't show up. And so he walked around the hotel asking different guests if they had seen her, and no one seemed to know where she was, but that group of friends that had sat with her at the bar, he found them, and they said, "Oh yeah, she went on the beach to watch the sunset." And so Nicola's father actually smiled to himself because he thought, great, I can go on the beach, find my daughter, and finally have a chance to have, a one-on-one conversation with her, because ever since I got to Antigua, I've been surrounded by guests and I barely had a chance to talk to her. And so Nicola's father walks up to the beach and he looks around and he doesn't see his daughter, and it's starting to get dark, so he figures, you know what, I'll give her a call. And so he calls his daughter and she doesn't pick up. He thinks, okay, she probably just isn't looking at her phone. After that, he called Nicola's partner, John, and he picked up and he said, "No, I haven't seen her. The last I heard, I thought she was going to the beach. That's what her friend said." And Nicola's father said, "Yeah, that's where I am and I can't find her, but I'm sure she's somewhere." And so after he hung up with John, Nicola's father went back into the hotel and he asked Nicola's kids if they had seen her, and they said no. And so now, feeling a little bit concerned, Nicola's father rounds up a couple of guests to go help him look for his daughter. And so they go up on the beach, and one of them quickly discovers Nicola's cell phone and sandals sitting on that chair near the hotel. And so right away, it just seems like this is a big red flag. She's out on the beach. We don't know where she is. She doesn't have her phone. And so now Nicola's father is really worried, and he calls the police. Then at some point, as the search party moved farther and farther down the beach, they heard the sound of someone screaming in the distance. And it sounded like a woman, and Nicola's father said it sounded like his daughter. And so they all start running in the direction of the screaming, but it's so far away and it's so dark that they can't make out who it is or even where they are. And after they ran down the beach a ways, the screaming just stopped. And so they really couldn't figure out who it was. And so everyone's just stumped and overwhelmed by the situation. And for the rest of the night, they just continued to look around the beach, and they never found the screaming woman, and they never found Nicola. The next morning, when the police were still on the beach looking for Nicola and now looking in the hotel as well, the tide went out, and that's when they discovered Nicola. After she left the bar, Nicola did go up onto the beach to watch the sunset, and she did it by going down to the water and just walking along the water's edge. And so as she walked away from the resort, watching this beautiful sunset, she walked deeper and deeper into the water until she was almost waist deep. And at some point, she hit a patch of quicksand and sunk into it. And so she began screaming and yelling for help, but no one could hear her because she was so far away from the resort. And so for hours, she sat there as the tide slowly came in, and she was just pinned, waiting to drown. And then finally, when people realized she was missing and that search party was within earshot of her, it was too late. The water levels were already at her neck. And by the time they actually got up pretty close to her, the water had gone over her head and she drowned. It turned out the search party was basically right next to her. By the time they got there, she was already underwater, so they couldn't see her. Growing up in Oklahoma, Blake Stanfield loved going out in the wilderness with his father, Neil. The pair were more like best friends than father and son, and they spent as much time together as they possibly could. But by the time Blake was in his 30s, he had become a medical doctor, and so he was really busy, and he was married, and he had a young kid, and so he didn't see his father very much. And then in 2003, when Blake was 38, he moved his family to Alaska, and so he really didn't see his father anymore. But shortly after moving, Blake had an idea. He wanted to surprise his dad on his 65th birthday with a rafting trip in Alaska. It was going to be this great way for the two to reconnect with each other. When he broke the news to his father, Neil was really touched by it and very excited, but at the same time, he was a little bit apprehensive. And he asked his son, are we going in a group? Is this going to be a guided rafting trip? And Blake said, oh no, that's the wrong way to do this. We will not have a good time if we go with a group. We're doing this alone. And so Neil said, well, isn't that a little bit risky, just the two of us out in the middle of Alaska? And Blake said, don't worry, I picked a river that by Alaskan standards is considered leisurely, so we'll be just fine. Neil was still hesitant about it, but the two of them were very confident outdoorsmen, and so ultimately he just went along with it. So later that year, in early July, Blake and Neil took a float plane out to the gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska. This park is totally beautiful, but it's also very dangerous because it's full of grizzly bears and wolves, and it's also very remote. There's no people anywhere near this park. It's basically untouched wilderness. Adding to the isolation and danger, Blake and Neil did not have their cell phones or a radio. It was Blake's idea. He said it would be a good idea for us to just totally disconnect and just spend quality time together. And then also Blake had chosen a starting point on this river that was situated basically right in the middle of the park, which meant it was 60 miles away from the nearest human settlement. So after they got dropped off by this float plane and then the captain of that plane took off again, Blake and Neil loaded their stuff into the raft and then they hopped in and they started cruising down this river. At first, their trip was awesome. The weather was perfect, the landscape was beautiful, the water was totally calm, and Neil, he might have had reservations about the safety of this trip, but quickly he was overcome with just how peaceful it was and how wonderful it was to be with just his son out on the open water. And in fact, Blake had intentionally booked this trip 2 weeks before the start of the official rafting season in Alaska, which meant really there was nobody else in the water. It was just those two. And they thought, wow, what luck. Except it turns out there's a very specific reason why the rafting season starts when it does in Alaska, because that's the earliest the ice melts in the river and it becomes safe to travel on. After 2 hours of peace and tranquility out on this river, Blake and Neil started to notice these large ice chunks in the water ahead of them. And they were easy enough to get around, but as they kept moving, the current was picking up and these ice chunks got bigger and bigger until they started being these huge sheets all across the edges of the river where there was only a narrow strip of water they could travel through. And at some point, Neil asked Blake if it would be a good idea to just pull the raft over to the side of the river and get out and reassess the situation and see if we've reached an anomaly in the river where just this section is frozen, or if this is going to continue for a lot farther, and if so, we need to make alternative plans here. But Blake was not having it. He was stubborn, he wanted to keep going, and he was convinced he could maneuver the boat around the ice. And he said, let's just keep going a little bit farther. And so when they went a little bit farther, they reached a point where the current was so strong that they could no longer get out of the river. They had to ride it like a rapid until it stopped. And so as the father and son are fighting with each other about not having gotten out of the river while they still had a chance, they were not paying attention to what was in front of them, and they came around a corner and there was this huge ice shelf that was right across the whole river that basically blocked the whole path. And they turned at the last second. They couldn't do anything either way, but the nose of the raft went directly under the ice shelf and it flipped the raft onto its side, dumping Neil and Blake into frigid Alaskan waters underneath the ice shelf. And Blake would later say that he really believed that this was it. He didn't know how far this ice shelf was going to go on for, and so he assumed, I'm about to drown. But they managed to hit this air pocket inside of this ice shelf. The ice basically formed up at a bow, and they both happened to pop up into it, and they gripped onto the ice. And they're looking at each other, and they have no idea how long this ice shelf continues, but the current is pulling them, and they know it's just a matter of time before they get sucked under and go back under the ice. And so they look at each other, and they don't really know what to say, but it's kind of obvious that they think they're about to drown. And then at some point, Neil gets sucked under and swept away, and then Blake follows shortly after. And unfortunately, they only tumbled along for about 10 or 15 more feet before they popped up again. But much like the boat that could not paddle out of the river because of how strong the current was, Blake and Neil could not get out of the river in time before they hit yet another ice shelf. And the next ice shelf was much longer than the first. And so they knew it was going to happen. They grabbed onto the ice shelf and they're holding on and they're trying to pull themselves back out, but the current's too strong. And at some point, they each had to take a big breath and then let go and got pulled directly under the ice. And so the whole time they're pressing their face up against the underside of this ice in hopes they find an air pocket, but they don't. And so the whole time they're just desperately looking for air and they're bumping into the underside of the ice. They have no idea how long it's going to go on for. And so after what felt like an eternity, Blake finally gets shot out the backside of this huge ice shelf. And he's still in the river, but there's no more ice shelves in front of him. And the current had slowed down a little bit. So he was able to make his way to the edge and get out of the water. And he turned to face the water and his dad was nowhere to be found. And so Blake turns and he doesn't see his father coming out of the ice. He doesn't know if he's still under, if he came out again. And so he turns and runs downstream in hopes that he might have come out already. And sure enough, he found his dad clutching a rock in the middle of this river farther up. His head was badly bleeding, but he was alive. And so Blake grabbed a stick and was able to bring his father back into shore. Even though they had survived being pulled under the ice, they now had no equipment, no gear, no food, no water, no anything because it was pulled under the water. And they were soaking wet and becoming hypothermic. And they're in the middle of nowhere with no one nearby to help them. And no one's expecting them for a week. And no planes are going to be in the area for 2 weeks. Fortunately, Blake had a lighter in his pocket that worked. And so they were able to start a fire and stay warm, and they were able to scare away grizzly bears and wolves. Blake finally walked away from their campsite, which was up on a mountain, and he went down to this river where he was able to flag down a float plane that was not even scheduled to be in the area. It was just totally random, and they saw Blake, they came back, they picked him up, and both men were just fine. They did say that even though the trip was a complete disaster and nearly killed both of them, it did reconnect them in a way that few things could, and their relationship is good as ever. But they both say they will never go rafting again. On July 10th, 1941, a brand new British submarine was commissioned called HMS Umpire. 9 days later, on July 19th, the submarine and her crew were told to meet up with a convoy moving north along the Medway River in England and make their way to Scotland. So Umpire joined up with the convoy, but then they started having engine problems that night, and they began drifting back behind the convoy until they were basically not in the convoy anymore at all. During this time, the commander of the submarine was up in the bridge, which is the area that controls the submarine when it's above surface, just above the wing. The captain of the Umpire was concerned this convoy would not see them when they came through because they were a submarine, so they're sitting low in the water and they're already all dark. They have no lights on the outside on purpose because this was during World War II and they didn't want German ships or planes to spot them. And because of their engine problems, they had drifted away from their convoy, which would have been protection. So the captain decides to deviate from their course to get the submarine clearly out of the way of this convoy. And so when he started turning the submarine, the steering broke, leaving the submarine now turned so its entire side is now facing this convoy, and they were still drifting directly towards this convoy. And so sure enough, before the captain could do anything, one of the larger ships struck the side of the submarine, immediately flooding their forward torpedo room. And for a brief second, the submarine and the ship were kind of mangled together, and then it slipped off the ship and it sunk all the way to the bottom, 18 meters down. The captain, along with the other 3 men that were up on the bridge with him when they were struck, they managed to leap out at the last second and were treading water when this all happened. As for the other 34 crew members, they were stuck inside when it sunk. A number of the crew had been sleeping at the time of the crash, and so all they felt was this crash, the power goes out, they leap out of their beds, and they're landing in waist-deep water, and they're running out into the halls, kind of fumbling around because they can't see anything, and all they can hear is the sound of water pouring inside of their submarine. And so these sailors had gone through all sorts of drills to prepare for this type of scenario where, power's out and you're sinking, and so they know by touch how to get to the one area that has an escape hatch, which is the engine room. And after 20 of them got inside the engine room, the water levels in the hallway were getting so high that it was spilling into that room, and it was getting to the point where if they didn't seal the door, they were going to flood this one room that was their only chance of survival. And so they had to make the heartbreaking decision to lock and seal that door, meaning the 14 other sailors on the other side, if they hadn't already died, were now condemned. But for the 20 men who now were going to be able to use this escape hatch, there was no guarantee that would work. Because to use the escape hatch on a submarine, you need to understand how it works. You can't just open a hatch on a submarine. It won't open. The pressure from the seawater presses down on it to where it literally cannot open. You might be able to open it a crack if you use a tool, but that's about it. In order to open the escape hatch, you need to use something called a lockout chamber. And so a lockout chamber is like this really tight claustrophobia-inducing thing that looks an awful lot like a gas chamber, where you step through one hatch and you shut it and you seal it so it's watertight, and then above you is your escape hatch. But you can't open it until the pressure inside of the chamber has been equalized. And the way they do that is they flood the inside of the chamber the escapee is in. And so you're standing inside of this tight space, totally sealed in, and there's a control panel inside the chamber itself and also inside the sub. If you're lucky enough to have someone do that for you, you turn on the chamber, at which point water is dumped inside of this tight space you're in until it's completely full and you're holding your breath, at which point you've now equalized. The pressure inside the chamber is equal to that outside, and you can actually open the hatch. So the person inside, on a breath hold, undoes the hatch, opens it up, and then hopefully your swim isn't too far because you're already on a breath hold, and you swim to the surface. And during World War II, submariners were outfitted with a special piece of equipment if they ever needed to leave via the escape hatch, and it was their Davis escape gear, which is basically this life jacket that's uninflated, and when you manually activate it, it suddenly inflates, and so when you go through that hatch, you would activate it, and it would assist you to get to the surface. And so after those 20 sailors had decided to seal off the engine room, they immediately shifted focus and began getting guys into the escape hatch. And one of their most junior sailors, a guy by the name of Killian, said he would stay inside the room and operate the control panel so everybody else had the best chance of getting out of the escape hatch. And so sure enough, he put all 19 into the hatch and he got them out of the submarine. And then he, on his own, had to get in the hatch, seal it himself, and control the panel in total darkness, flood the space, open it up, and shoot to the surface. He would live, and he would be awarded the British Empire Medal for bravery. One junior officer named Edward Jones was one of the 14 men that did not get to the engine room before they sealed it off. And when he got there and realized the situation, he turned around and looked down the hall, and there were only 3 other men that were standing there. And he didn't know how many had made it in the engine room. He figured this was the only 4 that had not made the cut. But in fact, there was actually 10 other people that were just stuck in various places inside of the submarine. But Jones decided he only had these guys in front of him, and so he said, "Hey, come with me, I have an idea." As Jones led them down this hallway, the water levels had risen up to their necks, and all these circuits on the walls were starting to spark all around them. And so Jones led them to the middle of the submarine, and then he turned and went up into the control room. And then from the control room, he went even farther up into what's called the conning tower. The conning tower is a submarine's main attack center. It's where you have those periscopes they look around in, and it also has the firing buttons for their torpedoes. It is not designed to be an escape hatch, because once you flood the conning tower, there's no control panel like there is on an escape hatch to drain the water that was used to equalize in order to open the hatch. So once the water's in, it's either you get to the surface or you drown. Also, in order to exit out of the conning tower, you need to go through this very narrow tube that goes straight up, and it's got a ladder through it that can barely fit one person climbing up, meaning the people at the bottom of the ladder will have to hold their breath a lot longer than the people at the top. So Jones and the other 3 sailors, they get to the conning tower and they seal the hatch at their feet, so blocking the hallway flood from coming into where they are. And they realize that even though they have to do this, there are no other alternatives here, that realistically 1 or 2 or more are going to die in the process of just trying to get out of the submarine. But it was all they could do, so they made peace with their decision. They climbed up and they opened the hatch just enough to let water come in, but quite a bit started coming in. The men wedged themselves as high up in the tunnel as they possibly could, but obviously not everybody could get all the way up to the hatch. And so 2 were down low, and Edward Jones and 1 other were up towards the top. And Jones would say that at first they were talking and praying, and then when they started feeling the water get closer and closer to their heads, they went silent. And then Jones remembers keeping his hand on the 1 man that was below him, and when his hand was wet, he knew the 2 men below him were completely submerged. And then the water came up to his face, covered his head, and at that point he opened it up and they swam out. Of the 4 men in the conning tower, only Edward Jones and the other guy who was high up in the tunnel with him made it to the surface. All told, only 14 of the 38 total crew survived the accident. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please tell the like button to deepen the defensive trench around OP Rock, and you can tell them that in exchange for their work, they can keep any of the artifacts they dig up out of the ground. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen's. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
200. For every $1 Iran spends firing a missile at Israel, Israel spends $200 trying to stop it. Not $2, not $20, 200. The specific cost exchange ratio that the mathematics of this conflict has been producing since February 28th, and that 23 days of official briefings, strategic assessments, and carefully worded statements about sustainable defense operations have been trying to obscure behind the language of successful interceptions and degraded Iranian capability and the war proceeding according to plan. The plan did not account for Wave 65. Iran just fired the 65th wave of Operation True Promise 4, the 65th named operational wave of missile and drone attacks against Israel and American assets since this conflict began. Not the 65th salvo, not the 65th barrage. The 65th wave, each one a distinct operational unit with a specific target set, a specific weapons mix, a specific assessment of the defensive gaps that the previous 64 waves revealed, and a specific cost to Iran of approximately $2 to $3 million per wave. $2 to $3 million per wave, times 65 waves, approximately $150 to $200 million of total Iranian offensive expenditure across the entire conflict, against which Israel has spent approximately $22 million defending against a single wave, multiplied across 65 waves, with Arrow 3 interceptors at $5 million each, with Iron Dome engagements at $50,000 to $100,000 each, with David's Sling interceptors at $1 million each. The total Israeli defensive expenditure across 65 waves is a number that no official has stated publicly, and that the classified briefings to the Senate Armed Services Committee have been describing in terms that senators from both parties have been calling unsustainable for 2 weeks. Wave 65 is not a military development. Wave 65 is a mathematics demonstration. And the mathematics says something that the official language of this conflict has been carefully designed not to say clearly. Iran can keep doing this. Israel cannot keep paying for stopping it. Stay with me. Because what Iran firing Wave 65, while Israel's interceptor inventory approaches operational zero, means not for today's specific missiles and today's specific intercepts, but for the fundamental sustainability of the defensive architecture that has been the foundation of Israeli civilian survival. And the strategic assumption that justified this conflict's initiation is the story that 65 waves have been building toward, and that wave, 65, makes impossible to defer. 200 to 1, 65 waves. The math is the weapon. Let's start with Wave 65 specifically, because the number itself requires examination before anything else, because the number is the story. Wave 65 is not a number that any pre-conflict planning document contemplated. The pre-conflict assessments of Iranian missile and drone capability, the assessments that the American and Israeli intelligence communities used to calculate what this conflict would look like, produced estimates of Iranian offensive capacity that placed the sustainable attack rate at a level that would be significantly degraded by day 10 and substantially eliminated by day 20. Day 10, Iranian missile launch rate down 92%. The assessment appeared confirmed. Ballistic missiles falling from 480 per day to 40 per day. Drone launches falling from 720 per day to 60 per day. Official briefings described significant progress. The trajectory appeared to support the 4 to 6 week completion timeline that the Pentagon and Trump had publicly projected. Day 23, Wave 65. The 92% reduction in ballistic missile launch rate is real. The IRGC spokesperson confirmed it, and we covered it in a previous video. But the 92% reduction in the volume metric that American military planning was using to measure progress obscured the specific metric that Iran was optimizing for. Iran was not trying to maintain volume. Iran was rationing for duration, reducing the rate to preserve the inventory, shifting from saturation attacks designed to overwhelm air defense by volume to precision attacks designed to exploit the specific gaps that saturation depletes. Wave 65 is a precision wave. Not 480 missiles, not even 40. A specific weapons mix. The Nasrallah missile making its 65th wave appearance. Khaybar Shekin variants with maneuvering warheads. Shahed drones as the distraction layer, targeted at the specific defensive gaps that 64 previous waves have mapped with systematic precision. Iran has been conducting 65 waves of real-time intelligence collection against Israeli air defense simultaneously with 65 waves of missile attacks. Each wave reveals where the gaps are. Each wave's engagement data refines the next wave's targeting. Wave 65 has 64 waves of engagement data behind it. It is the most precisely targeted wave this conflict has produced because it has the most intelligence behind it. That is what Wave 65 means operationally. The number is not just a count, it is a measure of accumulated targeting intelligence. Let's talk about the 200-to-1 ratio in the specific mathematical detail that the thumbnail promised, and that every viewer who clicked deserves to have explained with the precision that makes it real rather than rhetorical. Iran's primary offensive weapon in Wave 65 is the Nasrallah missile. Official IRGC designation unclear, but derived from the Qadr family. Solid fuel, maneuvering warhead. Range sufficient to reach any target in Israel from western Iranian territory. Production cost estimated at $250,000 to $400,000 per missile. Call it $300,000 as the midpoint. Israel's primary defensive weapon against the Nasrallah missile is the Arrow 3 interceptor. Manufactured by Israel Aerospace Industries and Boeing. Exoatmospheric intercept capability designed to engage ballistic missiles at altitudes above 100 kilometers. Unit cost approximately $3.5 million per interceptor. The exchange ratio for one missile against one interceptor, 3.5 million divided by 300,000 equals approximately 11.7 to 1. Iran spends $1, Israel spends $11.7. That ratio already favors Iran dramatically, but it is not the 200-to-1 that the thumbnail states. The 200-to-1 comes from the engagement reality, not the unit cost ratio. Here is why. Israel does not fire one Arrow 3 per incoming missile. The Arrow 3's probability of kill against a maneuvering warhead, a warhead that changes its trajectory during descent as the Nasrallah and K-bar Shekin variants do, is approximately 60 to 70% per shot. To achieve a 90% probability of intercept against a maneuvering warhead, Israel must fire approximately 2 to 3 Arrow 3 interceptors per incoming missile, sometimes more against a highly maneuvering target. 2 Arrow 3 interceptors at $3.5 million each equals $7 million to stop one $300,000 missile. 7 million divided by 300,000 equals 23 to 1, still not 200 to 1. The additional multiplier comes from the full defensive response that a wave attack requires. Wave 65 is not one missile. It is a composite attack. Shahed drones requiring Iron Dome engagement at $50,000 to $100,000 per interceptor. Medium-range missiles requiring David's sling engagement at $1 million per interceptor, and the ballistic missiles requiring Arrow engagement at $3.5 million per shot. The full wave defense expenditure divided by the full wave offensive expenditure produces the ratio that accounting for the entire engagement, not just the most expensive intercept pair, generates. Iran fires a wave costing approximately $2 to $3 million in offensive weapons. Israel spends approximately $20 to $25 million defending against it in interceptor costs alone before infrastructure damage is counted. $20 million divided by $100,000 of Iranian expenditure on the cheapest components of the wave equals 200 to 1 at the margin of the exchange, where Shahed drones are absorbed by Iron Dome batteries whose interceptors cost twice the drone they are stopping. The 200 to 1 is the ratio at the margin. The average across the full exchange is closer to 8 to 10 to 1, but the margin is where the system breaks first. And the margin has been breaking since Wave 30. Let's talk about what 65 waves have done to the specific interceptor inventory that Israel entered this conflict with, and what the remaining inventory means for the waves that follow Wave 65. Israel's Arrow 3 inventory entering this conflict, estimated 200 to 300 interceptors. Call it 250 as the midpoint. Against 65 waves averaging approximately 3 Arrow 3 shots per incoming ballistic missile, at 5 to 10 ballistic missiles per wave, the consumption rate is approximately 15 to 30 Arrow 3 interceptors per wave. At 20 interceptors per wave across 65 waves, the cumulative expenditure is 1,300 interceptors. Wait, well, 300 is more than 250. That arithmetic appears to fail. Here is why it does not. The 92% reduction in Iranian ballistic missile fire rate that occurred by day 10 changed the wave composition. Early waves, days 1 through 10, were high-volume ballistic missile waves consuming Arrow interceptors at maximum rate. Waves 11 through 65 have been lower volume, more precision-focused waves consuming fewer Arrow interceptors per wave, as the ballistic missile component of each wave decreased, and the drone and cruise missile components requiring cheaper defensive interceptors increased. The cumulative Arrow 3 expenditure is not 1,300. It is the consumption from high-volume early waves plus lower consumption later waves. Classified assessments put the remaining Arrow 3 inventory somewhere between 30 and 80 interceptors, depending on the source and the classification level of the estimate. 30 to 80 Arrow 3 interceptors remaining, against Iranian waves that will continue until a ceasefire is reached or the conflict ends. At 15 interceptors per ballistic missile-containing wave, the remaining inventory covers 2 to 5 more waves of significant ballistic missile content. Wave 65 is not the last wave Iran can fire. It may be close to the last wave that Israel can effectively defend against with Arrow 3. Let's talk about what happens when Arrow 3 inventory reaches actual zero rather than operational zero. Because the distinction between operational zero, not enough to protect the most important targets, and actual zero, no interceptors remaining, describes two different strategic situations. The distance between them is measurable in days, not weeks. Operational zero is what produced the Dimona missiles getting through. Not enough Arrow 3 remaining to provide full southern coverage while maintaining central coverage. The priority allocation leaves gaps. The gaps let missiles through. 180 people injured. Actual zero is the situation where Arrow 3 cannot be allocated at all, where the only remaining air defense layers are the David's sling system, designed for medium-range threats at lower altitudes, not for the long-range ballistic missiles that Iran fires from 500 kilometers away, and the Iron Dome system, designed for short-range rockets and drones, not for ballistic missiles. Without Arrow 3, the engagement chain against Iranian ballistic missiles has no exoatmospheric intercept layer. The missiles that Arrow was supposed to stop at 100 kilometers altitude reach the Iron Dome engagement envelope at altitudes and speeds that Iron Dome was not designed to defeat. Actual zero means Iranian ballistic missiles arrive at Israeli population centers with no effective intercept attempt. Not reduced interception, not partial defense, no meaningful defense against the specific weapon category that Iran uses for its highest value strikes against the highest value targets. Dimona without Arrow 3 is not Dimona with 180 injuries. Dimona without Arrow 3 is Dimona with whatever 650 kilograms of maneuvering warhead at Mach 5 produces when there is nothing between the warhead and the facility behind the fence. The distance between operational zero and actual zero is the distance that the 30 to 80 remaining Arrow 3 interceptors covers. At 15 interceptors per significant wave, 2 to 5 waves from actual zero. Wave 65 was fired today. Let's talk about what Iran knows about the Arrow 3 inventory. Because the specific operational precision of Wave 65, targeting the Haifa refinery, targeting air bases in the south, maintaining the pressure on southern Israel where Arrow coverage has been most depleted, is not random. It reflects Iranian intelligence collection against Israeli defensive capability that is producing targeting decisions calibrated to the specific depletion state of the inventory being depleted. Iran knows the Arrow 3 is running out, not the precise classified number, but the operational evidence. Each wave that produces intercepts provides Iran with engagement data. The number of intercept attempts, the intercept altitudes, the geographic distribution of engagements that allows Iranian targeting analysts to build a picture of the remaining inventory's distribution and depth. Wave 30 produced a specific engagement pattern. Wave 40 produced a different one. Wave 65 produces the engagement pattern of a defensive system that is making prioritization decisions, allocating scarce interceptors to the highest value threats in the highest priority coverage areas, rather than the engagement pattern of a system with surplus capacity providing full coverage everywhere. Iranian targeting analysts reading the Wave 65 engagement data know something specific. The engagement pattern of a system making prioritization decisions looks different from the engagement pattern of a system with surplus. The gaps that prioritization creates are visible in what gets through and where it gets through. The Dimona missiles getting through mapped a specific gap. Wave 65's targeting exploits what the Dimona engagement data showed about the southern coverage state. Iran is not guessing about the Arrow 3 depletion. Iran is measuring it, one wave at a time, one engagement pattern at a time. 65 waves of measurement against a system that entered the conflict said Iran's ability to sustain offensive operations would be substantially degraded by day 20. Wave 65 was fired on day 23, not a symbolic gesture, not the last gasp of a depleted arsenal, a precision wave, using the Nasrallah missile in its Wave 65 appearance, targeting refined objectives, employing the specific drone distraction and ballistic missile combination that has been the operational signature of Iranian wave design since the 92% volume reduction changed the wave composition from saturation to precision. The intelligence community's pre-conflict assessment failed to account for Iranian operational adaptation. The assessment measured Iranian offensive capability in volume terms. How many missiles can Iran fire per day? Iran optimized in duration terms. How many precisely targeted waves can Iran sustain across a conflict whose length the assessment was trying to shorten? Volume versus duration is the specific mismatch between American planning assumptions and Iranian operational doctrine that 65 waves have exposed. America planned to degrade volume. Iran rationed for duration. America succeeded at degrading volume. Iran succeeded at sustaining duration. Both claims of success are accurate. Only one of them produces wave 65. The other one produces official statements about the 92% reduction in missile fire rate, while Iran fires wave 65 on day 23, against an Arrow 3 inventory 2 to 5 waves from actual 0. Let's talk about Israel's response options at Wave 65, and why every option available is worse than the option that was available before Wave 1. Option 1, continue intercepting. Spend the remaining 30 to 80 Arrow 3 interceptors against the waves that follow Wave 65. Maintain the defensive posture as long as the inventory lasts, except that when the inventory reaches actual 0, the defensive posture changes fundamentally. This is the current strategy. It is the strategy that Wave 65 has brought to the edge of its mathematical limit. Option 2, strike Iranian missile production. Hit the facilities that are producing the Nasrallah missiles and the Khaybar-Shikan variants and the Shahed drones that Wave 65 employed. Except the IDF reported 2 weeks ago that Iran currently does not have the ability to manufacture any new missiles because of the strikes on production facilities. Yet Wave 65 happened. Missiles were fired. The strike campaign against production either has not eliminated production, or Iran has sufficient stockpile that production elimination does not stop waves from happening. Either conclusion makes Option 2's premise questionable. Option 3, accept ceasefire terms. The Omani mediation that produced the 5-day postponement of power plant strikes. The Chinese nuclear verification framework. The diplomatic exit from a conflict whose mathematics have reached the point where Wave 65 represents a sustainability crisis for the defensive side. This option requires accepting terms that the conflict was initiated to avoid: a nuclear-armed Iran with a surviving program, a surviving missile force at reduced but functional capacity, and the specific knowledge that Israeli air defense can be depleted to operational 0 through 65 waves of 200 to 1 cost exchange. Option 4, escalate beyond conventional response. The option that is not discussed in official briefings, and that the nuclear vocabulary of the Natanz-Dimona exchange has made impossible to ignore completely. The option that the 5 days of postponement are buying time to make unnecessary. Every option is worse than the option that existed before Wave 1, not because the options changed, because 65 waves changed the conditions under which every option must be executed. Let's talk about what the global economy has absorbed across 65 waves, and what Wave 65 adds to an accumulation that Goldman Sachs has projected could last through 2027. Oil at $112 per barrel. Goldman Sachs projecting higher prices through 2027. The Strait of Hormuz closed to all but Iran's permitted traffic. The Ras Laffan LNG facility damaged. 17% of global LNG capacity disrupted, $20 billion per year in losses, 9% annual hit to Qatar's GDP. Kuwait's Mina Al Ahmadi refinery struck twice. The Haifa refinery struck in Wave 65. The UAE energy infrastructure targeted across multiple waves. The maritime alternative to Hormuz disrupted by the Iris Dana torpedo off Sri Lanka. 65 waves have not just been striking Israeli military targets, they have been systematically targeting the global energy infrastructure that connects Gulf production to global consumption. Each wave that strikes a refinery or an energy facility or a tanker or a port adds to the cumulative disruption that the oil price reflects. The 200 to 1 cost ratio of stopping the missiles does not include the infrastructure damage that the missiles that get through produce. The actual economic exchange ratio, including infrastructure damage, including energy disruption, including the oil price premium that Hormuz closure sustains, is not 200 to 1. It is the ratio that Goldman Sachs projects lasting through 2027. Wave 65 hit the Haifa refinery. Wave 65 hit air bases in southern Israel. Wave 65 continued the systematic energy infrastructure pressure that has been driving the oil price since Wave 1. The cumulative damage of 65 waves is not the sum of 65 individual strikes. It is the compound effect of 65 waves against an economy that has been absorbing each previous wave while trying to function. Israel's economy has been under maximum stress for 23 days. Tourism gone. Foreign investment paused. The shekel depreciated. Defense spending consuming the budget at rates that leave no room for the civilian economy that sustains the society conducting the war. 65 waves is not just a military attrition campaign. It is an economic attrition campaign executed by an adversary whose own economy has been under maximum stress for far longer than 23 days and has developed the specific resilience that decades of sanctions-era adaptation produce. Let's talk about what Russia and China are processing from Wave 65 in the context of the ceasefire negotiations that are running simultaneously with the conflict's 65th wave. Russia has been watching the 200-to-1 cost exchange ratio for 65 waves. Russia knows this ratio better than any other external power because Russia has been studying American and Israeli air defense economics for decades in the context of its own conflict with Ukraine, where the cost exchange ratio between Iranian-supplied Shahed drones and Ukrainian interceptors has produced the same fundamental lesson. The defender pays more to stop the attacker than the attacker pays to attack. Russia operationalized this lesson in Ukraine. Iran has operationalized it in 65 waves against Israel. Russia's ceasefire advocacy has been consistent throughout this conflict. Wave 65 gives that advocacy its most powerful specific argument yet. Not humanitarian, not strategic, mathematical. The interceptor inventory is 2 to 5 waves from actual zero. Wave 65 was fired on day 23. The 4 to 6 week timeline the Pentagon projected would end this conflict has 1 to 2 weeks remaining. The mathematics of the defensive inventory do not support 1 to 2 additional weeks of wave-level engagements. China is using the Wave 65 mathematics in its nuclear verification proposal framework, not as a humanitarian argument, but as a strategic inevitability argument. China's proposal asks both sides to acknowledge that the military phase has reached the point where continuation serves neither side's interests. The 200-to-1 ratio running across 65 waves is the specific evidence that continuation does not serve Israel's defensive interests. The Natanz Dimona nuclear vocabulary exchange is the specific evidence that continuation does not serve Iran's nuclear interests. Both arguments together constitute the case for the ceasefire that China's 5 permanent member emergency session was convened to advance. The ceasefire case has never been stronger than it is after Wave 65. The conflict has never been more dangerous than it is after Wave 65. Both are true simultaneously. That is the specific moment that Oman is mediating and that 5 days of postponed power plant strikes are trying to resolve. Here is what Iran firing Wave 65. While every Israeli interceptor costs 200 times more than the missile it stops, means for this war from this morning forward. It means the pre-conflict intelligence assessment of Iranian offensive sustainability was wrong in the direction that matters most, not wrong about volume. The 92% reduction is real. Wrong about duration. Iran rationed for 65 waves, while America planned for degradation by day 20. The planning assumption failed on day 23. It means the Arrow 3 inventory that Israel entered this conflict with is 2 to 5 waves from actual zero. The operational zero that let Dimona missiles through was crossed days ago. The actual zero, no Arrow 3 remaining for any engagement, is the specific endpoint that Wave 65's mathematics are approaching at a rate that classified briefings are describing as critical, and that the 65 wave number makes visible to anyone willing to do the arithmetic. It means the 200-to-1 cost exchange ratio that has been running since Wave 1 has consumed approximately $1 billion of Israeli defensive expenditure across 65 waves, against approximately $150 to $200 million of Iranian offensive expenditure. The economic attrition dimension of Wave 65 is not the missile that struck the Haifa refinery. It is the $1 billion of interceptors spent trying to stop the missiles that did not strike the Haifa refinery. And it means the war that was supposed to end in 4 to 6 weeks is on day 23, with the defensive inventory approaching zero, and the offensive side on Wave 65, with the ceasefire that 5 days of postponement bought time to negotiate, still not agreed. Wave 65. Not the last wave Iran can fire. Possibly the last wave the Arrow 3 inventory can fully engage. $200 spent stopping $1 of missile, 65 times. And the mathematics of what happens when the interceptors run out while the waves keep coming is not a classified calculation. It is arithmetic, available to anyone, visible in the number 65, and in the specific equation that the number represents. Iran keeps firing. Israel keeps spending $200 to stop each one. Wave 66 is already being planned in the 31 decentralized command centers that 7,000 American strikes have not eliminated. The interceptors are almost gone. The waves are not.
The clue that finally solved this murder was right in front of everyone the whole time, but it would take almost a decade and the intervention of a secret crime-solving society for investigators to finally understand its disturbing significance. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please recrust the like button's Smucker's Uncrustables. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our video uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. When classes began at Drexel University in Philadelphia on the morning of November 30th, 1984, students walking into Randall Hall made a gruesome discovery. Crumpled at the bottom of an outdoor stairwell underneath a gray jacket was the body of a young woman. She had cuts and bruising all over her face, and she had a deep purple line that went all around her neck from where she had been strangled to death. She had no purse, no backpack, nothing to identify her. There was no evidence of sexual assault because she was fully clothed, although she was missing her shoes and socks. Police immediately cordoned off the area. Their first suspicion was this was a robbery that turned deadly. But right away, the police knew they were in for a very difficult investigation because, one, there were no cameras inside or outside of Randall Hall, so they couldn't just review the footage to see what happened to Debbie. And two, there was a virtually unlimited number of suspects because Drexel University was not an isolated campus. Its buildings were integrated into West Philadelphia, and Randall Hall itself was located right along a known cut-through that residents that lived in and around Drexler would use almost every single day. And it was clear this young woman had not been killed in this stairwell. She had been killed elsewhere and then dragged a great distance, losing her shoes in the process before being dumped at this spot. But just a couple of hours after the body was discovered, the police received a lucky break when a young man who was combative and frantic rushed the closed-off crime scene and demanded he be let through because he said he knew the identity of the dead girl. The police were immediately suspicious because they didn't even know who this dead girl was. So they pull the young man aside and they interview him, and he tells police his name is Kurt Rayner, he's a student at Drexel University, and he believes the girl they had found, the dead girl, was his girlfriend, 20-year-old Debbie Wilson, who was also a student. And then he proceeded to give police a very long and complicated explanation of how he figured out the girl inside was his girlfriend. He said the night before he was with Debbie in Randall Hall in the computer lab in the basement. He said Debbie had a big project that was due the next day and that he had offered to just keep her company while she worked. But by about 1:30 in the morning, Debbie still had a lot of work to do, and Kurt said he was just really tired and didn't know if he could stay awake any longer, and so he asked Debbie if it would be okay if he took off early. Debbie said it was totally fine. She was used to working late at this computer lab, and Kurt, even though he wanted to stick around and walk her safely to her car when she was done, he felt like she was okay, and so he took off on his own. On his walk back to the dorm, Kurt said he passed by a campus security guard, and he actually asked him if he wouldn't mind checking on his girlfriend in the computer lab because she was all alone and it was late, and the security guard said, "No problem, I'll make sure she's okay." The next morning when Kurt woke up, he heard rumors from other students on campus about a woman's body being found just outside of Randall Hall, and that apparently it looked like murder. Kurt said he didn't think much of it at first, but that day when he went into campus to meet up with Debbie, he saw her car still parked in the computer lab parking lot, looking like it had never left. And then when he got to the meeting site, Debbie never showed. And he said it was at that point that he realized the dead woman in Randall Hall must be Debbie. And he wasn't wrong, it was Debbie, but the police were not buying his story. He was the last person to see Debbie alive, and by his own admonition, he had heard that morning about a dead woman being found at Randall Hall, the very place he had left his girlfriend the night before all alone. But it took him hours to bring this up to anyone. The police also noticed he had bruises on his knuckles and a deep cut between his fingers. Suddenly, Kurt seemed like the killer, and this crime that initially looked like a robbery gone wrong now looked like something much more personal. Strangulation is intimate. The killer almost always is face to face with their victim, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of rage. And afterwards, the killer had covered Debbie's body with her jacket, an act that indicated remorse or even respect. And investigators know that generally when a woman is murdered, her romantic partner is the culprit. Instead of tipping off Kurt that they were looking at him as the primary suspect, they told him to go back to his dorm room and they would be in touch with him as the investigation developed. In the meantime, investigators turned their attention to the computer lab in Randall Hall, where Kurt said Debbie had been last. Debbie had logged into a computer at the front of the lab, but had not logged out. Her computer cursor was left blinking mid-sentence at 1:38 a.m., leading investigators to believe she was interrupted by her attacker inside of the lab. Investigators found 2 extension cords on the ground near this computer that matched the ligature marks on Debbie's neck. They also found a small spot of blood on the back of Debbie's chair that they sent off for testing. As police swept the computer lab, they began commenting on how neat everything looked, considering that there must have been some sort of death struggle that took place in there. And that's when they realized there had been a huge setback in this case. The janitor that morning had cleaned the computer lab and the hall right outside, likely destroying critical physical evidence. They interviewed the janitor, who had a rock-solid alibi and was incredibly remorseful at unintentionally destroying the crime scene. And so they asked the janitor, before you cleaned it up, was there anything strange about the computer lab or the hallway right outside of the computer lab? And the janitor said no, it was all normal, but she did say it looked like the tables and chairs had been moved around inside of the computer lab, but it didn't stand out to her because it always looked that way when she went in to clean it up. Because the police lacked physical evidence, they couldn't just go arrest Kurt, even though they wanted to. And so instead, they asked him if he'd be willing to come down to the station for a formal interview, and he said he would. During the interview, Kurt insisted he had nothing to do with Debbie's death. As for the bruises and cut on his hand, he said he had punched a wall after finding out what had happened to Debbie, and the cut in the middle of his fingers was from working on his car, but neither of those things could be proven. After this interview yielded no new results, and they still had no evidence on Kurt, they told him he could go, and in the interim, they began digging into his alibi. Kurt had previously told police that after leaving Debbie in the computer lab, on his walk back to his dorm, he had passed a security guard and asked that security guard to check on Debbie. And so the police were able to track down that security guard who confirmed Kurt's alibi. The security guard's name was Bryce Clapman, who was a longtime employee of Drexel University with a stellar work record and no criminal history. Clapman said he spoke with Kurt around 1:30 in the morning as Kurt was walking back towards the dorms. After speaking with Kurt, Clapman radioed Bronson Ziegler, who was one of the 2 security guards that were working in Randall Hall that night, and he told him that he or the other guy, David Dixon, would need to go down into the basement and check on this girl. Shortly after radioing Ziegler, Clapman would say he saw a person, presumably a student, come out of Randall Hall. He said he was just too far away and it was too dark that he couldn't make out any features, but he definitely saw someone walking around the premise around 1:30 in the morning. Clapman told police he never stepped foot inside of Randall Hall that night and that he was willing to take a lie detector test. Police ran the backgrounds of Bronson Ziegler and David Dixon. Dixon was a military veteran with a pristine record who was still in the Army Reserves. As for Ziegler, he had spent time in jail for burglary and had actually lied about it to get his job as a security guard. When police interviewed Ziegler, he was evasive and frustrated, and he said that he did receive the message from Clapman to go check on the girl, but he didn't feel like doing it himself, so he radioed Dixon and said he should go do it. Ziegler insisted he had done his rounds properly and he had never stepped foot inside of the computer lab. He told detectives they could check his security guard clock that he carried with him every time he did rounds, which was basically like a punch card where there was designated stations along his security rounds where he would punch this card that stamped a time that he had arrived at that station. And so over the course of the night, he would punch his card at each of these stations, and there was a record of what time he arrived and what time he left. And so when they checked this record, it showed that Ziegler had hit all the stations at the correct time. But that didn't mean he didn't kill her, because there was lots of time in between rounds that he could have attacked her. Towards the end of the interview, Ziegler accused detectives of messing with him, and then he sarcastically said he had killed Debbie, and then he refused to take a lie detector test. When the police interviewed Dixon, he said that Ziegler had never radioed him asking him to check on the girl in the computer lab. However, he did say he was aware of someone working late in the computer lab because around 2:15 in the morning he had walked past and the lights were on and he heard the sound of printers working inside. And so not wanting to disturb whoever was in there, he didn't even poke his head in. He just figured he would come back in a couple hours and make sure they were gone. And so over the next couple of hours, he chatted on the phone with his girlfriend, and then around 4 in the morning, he went back down to the computer lab and the lights were off and the door was locked. And so he figured whoever had been in there had finished up and left, and Ziegler had locked up after them. When asked why he or Ziegler had not discovered Debbie's body, he said their security rounds did not leave the building, and so that stairwell was considered outside of the building, and so they never would have seen her. At this point, Clapman and Dixon were ruled out as suspects, but Ziegler became a primary suspect. But just as with the boyfriend, Kurt Rayner, there was no physical evidence tying Ziegler to the crime, and so they couldn't arrest him. Investigators decided instead to try to track down that person Clapman had seen walking around Randall Hall around 1:30 in the morning after speaking with Kurt and after radioing Ziegler. It would turn out to be 28-year-old PhD student Ashlyn Berhard, who was known for keeping long hours and was also known for sneaking up behind the female secretaries that worked in his office and suddenly holding a pencil up to their neck and threatening to kill them. His office also happened to be directly above where Debbie's body was ultimately found inside of that stairwell. When interviewed by police, Ashland said he had been in Randall Hall the night Debbie had been killed, but didn't know Debbie, had no interaction with her, and didn't leave his office the whole night. He quickly agreed to take a lie detector test, but he failed it. Scrambling to explain it, he named 2 other students that were in the office with him that could be his alibi. But when police spoke to these 2 other students, they said, no, Ashland was not in the office the whole time. He left around 1 in the morning and was gone for about 3 hours. He said he was going to take a nap. When the police approached Ashland with this information, he said, oh, you know what? I forgot to tell you about my nap. Yes, I left for a few hours. I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, went back inside, and slept in one of the study hall rooms. But besides that, I was inside of that building for a full 24 hours, and I never saw Debbie. I had no interaction with her. It's just coincidence that my nap coincided with when she was killed. But detectives were not buying it. They believed wholeheartedly that now, finally, they had found their killer. But just like with Kurt and with Ziegler, they had no physical evidence tying Ashland to the crime, and so they couldn't arrest him. And because they were not able to make any arrests, the police just continued to look for more suspects. And so they began speaking to some of Debbie's friends and acquaintances, and it came out that Debbie actually had a stalker. It was another student named Alan Smith, who had previously been one of Debbie's very close friends, but at some point he wanted to take the relationship from platonic to romantic, and Debbie rejected him. Alan apparently didn't take this very well and took to following Debbie around campus, trying to get her to stop and talk to him and try to reconcile their relationship, but Debbie every time would just say no, and Alan got increasingly more angry about it. And just the day before Debbie was killed, their friends saw Debbie fighting with Alan in the middle of campus, where Alan had actually grabbed her shoulder and was shaking her and yelling at her. Police tracked down Alan, and he was cooperative and said he did not kill Debbie, but he didn't have an alibi. He just said he was alone in his apartment on the night that Debbie was killed. And so, like all the other primary suspects in this case, there was no physical evidence tying Alan to the crime, and so they couldn't make an arrest. Around this time, the lab that tested the blood spatter that was on Debbie's chair inside of the computer lab came back with their results. DNA profiling was not available back then, so all they could provide was blood type. The blood type that came back from that little spot was type A, and Debbie's blood was type O, meaning this blood spot likely belonged to Debbie's killer, who during their struggle must have gotten wounded and then bled on the chair. And so right away, the police got Kurt Rayner, Bronson Ziegler, Ashland Bearhard, and Alan Smith to all come in and provide a blood sample, and they figured if any one of them was type A, that they probably were the killer. But unbelievably, when their test results came back in, none of them were type A. It was a crushing blow to the investigation. The first few days after Debbie's killing seemed so full of promising leads, but now with this blood type development, investigators had no suspects. And all of a sudden, the Drexel community was starting to panic. Students were outraged at the light security and wondered why the security guards were not allowed to carry weapons. The administration put up a $10,000 reward for any information about who could have done this. And the president of the university told students to use the buddy system and never be alone on campus because he believed the killer was one of us. No one could understand why anyone would want to target Debbie in the first place. She seemed like such a wonderful person that was nice to everyone. She had modeled in high school, but she wasn't vain. She'd actually turned down getting braces because she was worried it might affect her clarinet playing. She was an average student, but she had an uncommon drive. She worked really hard to get good grades. Whenever she was feeling down or wasn't feeling motivated, she would stare at a picture of a Mercedes-Benz car that was there to inspire her and remind her what she could achieve if she continued to work hard. When she was killed, that picture of the Mercedes-Benz still hung above her desk. It was ultimately her work ethic that put her in danger because she was prepared to stay at that computer lab as long as it took to make sure her project was perfect. The few pieces of physical evidence the police had didn't fit together. The crime wasn't really a robbery. While she was missing her shoes and socks, her backpack had turned up at the campus lost and found about a week later, and no one knows how it got there or who put it there. Inside, it appeared all of her belongings were still there. Also, when she was discovered, she was still wearing her expensive watch. Her murder looked personal, but the police could not prove that someone who actually knew her was the one who killed her. Police considered a few other suspects, but like all the others, there wasn't enough evidence to make any arrests and so eventually Debbie's case went cold. In 1985, the Philadelphia Inquirer ran a story about unsolved cases that most haunted detectives, and Debbie's was one of them. Some of the detectives that were involved in the case said they believed this was a random killing and that the killer would most likely strike again. Debbie's case eventually disappeared from headlines, and it languished for 8 years. And then, in the spring of 1992, Debbie's murder was assigned to a cold case squad led by Detective Bob Snyder. And desperate to crack the case, Snyder threw a Hail Mary. He took the case to the VDOC Society, which is a private and highly selective club of geniuses from all walks of criminology. Homicide detectives, prosecutors, defense attorneys, FBI agents, forensic scientists, even an aeronautic physicist. They came from all over the world for these monthly closed-door sessions where they would talk about these unsolvable cases and try to solve them. So in one of their monthly closed-door sessions, Detective Snyder stood in front of the VDOC Society and laid out the details of Debbie Wilson's murder. Then he opened the floor to questions, and for hours the society got nowhere. Then Richard Walter, who was a founding member of the society, said that he had a theory. Walter was a famous criminal psychologist who had profiled some of the world's most infamous killers. Most of his work is actually still confidential. He believed the killer was a power-assertive, macho-type guy that liked being in control. Walter pointed to one clue that detectives and everyone seemed to have overlooked after all these years, and that was Debbie's missing shoes. He said the missing shoes were not random, they were the most important clue. The killer, Walter predicted, was a foot fetishist. Detective Snyder had nothing else to go on, and he was really intrigued by this idea, so he brought the information back to the cold case squad and they began re-interviewing everybody involved in the case. When they spoke with the manager of the computer lab at Randall Hall, he told them he was always bothered by one particular detail. The printers in the lab always turned off after 10 p.m., and so he was always confused how the security guard David Dixon could have heard the sound of printers inside the lab at 2:15 in the morning like he claimed. Detectives were shocked. Somehow no one had picked up on this discrepancy. They began looking more closely at David Dixon, who had been ruled out as a suspect and was viewed by and large as this pristine military veteran with no criminal history, and they dug all the way to the back of his military file where they discovered in 1979, the first year he was in the service, he had gotten in trouble for stealing another soldier's white Reebok sneakers, the exact type of shoe that Debbie was known to wear. Police began interviewing Dixon's former and current neighbors, and at least 4 women reported having a break-in when Dixon was living next to them, and the only thing missing was their white sneakers and dirty socks, although none of these women actually ever found out who was responsible. When they raided Dixon's apartment, they found in one of his closets 20 sets of used women's white shoes that were all wrapped in plastic like they were trophies. They also found 77 homemade videos, presumably shot by Dixon, that are just filming the feet of women walking around in white shoes. Dixon's alibi on the night that Debbie was killed was that most of the time he was on the phone with his girlfriend. His girlfriend had become his wife, and then she became his ex-wife. And so when detectives spoke to her, she told them that they had only spoke for a couple of minutes that night, not for a couple of hours. Police arrested Dixon in June of 1993, and he never admitted to anything, but as soon as he got into his cell, he started bragging to his cellmate about how he had killed Debbie because he wanted to have his way with her feet, and his cellmate immediately told on him. Dixon was ultimately found guilty of killing Debbie Wilson, and he was sentenced to life in prison. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp, and if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please recrust the like button, Smucker's Uncrustables. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See you.